Hello and welcome back to the fourth lesson in the AcademiCode Android Development Fundamentals series. In this lesson we're going to be introducing activities and actually working with some of the code we made in the XML layouts lesson previously to display that layout using activities. So let's briefly talk about what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be reviewing the definition of an activity, finding out what it really is. And then we're going to be talking about what's known as the activity lifecycle, so seeing how an activity lives within an application and how you can react to certain events that occur within an activity. And then finally we're going to create a simple activity and we're going to hook the layout we made in the previous lesson into this activity so that we can display a working application for the user. So let's get started by first understanding what an activity is. Now if you go to developer.android.com, you're going to be presented with this definition here. An activity is a single focused thing that the user can do. And that is really the simplest definition we can get to, because the activity is going to be some sort of task that the user's working with currently. It's where we're interacting with the user to accomplish something. The example that I used previously was that a login screen would be the first activity presented to the user. After they pass that screen by entering their credentials, they'd be brought to a menu screen activity where they can interact with the application more. And typically activities do have a user interface associated with them because they're closely tied with the user, but that interface isn't always the same. And by that I mean that an activity might not always take up the entire screen space like you'd expect. But to further illustrate that, I want to bring up three examples now. All three of these screens here are representing activities, different activities. You might recognize the first two from the tutorial application we made in the very first lesson of this series. And this is kind of the standard activity you see. It's just the main screen of our application. This activity takes up the entire screen space. But we can also have activities like this, where it's more of a dialogue, and this is simply done using themes to alter the way the layout's presented for that activity, but it is in and of itself an activity. We also have another activity which is probably something you're more familiar with seeing on the far right here. This is the generic Android alarm clock for some of the more modern phones, and I just wanted to share that that is also an activity. It's an activity embedded in what's known as a fragment. We're going to get into that very later on in our Android series here, but it is an activity where the user would interface with the application to set an alarm in this example. So in summary, you can think of activities as being paired almost always with an XML layout describing the user interface of that activity. But why do we need the activity? Well, to handle everything kind of on the back end, all the Java code that defines the actual functionality of that task that we're currently using to interact with the user. So the concept of activities is kind of simple, but in order to understand them comprehensively, we have to take a look at the activity lifecycle. This is where some of the complications come into play and some of the programming paradigm shifts have to occur. If you're typically used to writing basic Java applications, you won't really be used to the more event-based functionality that comes along with developing Android applications and working with activities. Now those events actually get captured in callbacks thanks to the Android operating system, and we can work with those callbacks that represent kind of the state of the activity to code our functionality of the application. So let me illustrate the activity lifecycle for you, how an activity starts all the way until it's completely done. So an activity is launched when a user taps on the activity or activates it in some way. And then after that, the onCreate callback is called. These are actual methods in the Java code. Immediately followed by the onStart callback, and finally by the onResume callback. These three are called in sequence. And then at that point, the activity is actually running. This is usually the time at which the activity is actually active and the user's participating in the experience that that activity is providing. So an activity will just keep running until some outside force makes it change. And when that happens, the first callback we reach is onPause. This occurs when the activity moves into the background. Now what can happen from here, well, there's really two things. First, the user could return to that activity in some way, in which case we go back to onResume and then begin running that activity. Or we'll move to the onStop callback. Now this happens when the activity is completely invisible. Now to distinguish between onPause and onStop, because they sound like they do the same thing, onPause is called when the activity moves into the background. So if a dialogue activity, or just a dialogue in general, appears on top of the activity, the user can still see the activity that's behind it. It'll just be grayed out. That's when we reach onPause. Then we go to onStop when it's completely invisible. The user cannot interact with it in any way. From the onStop callback, it gets a little bit complicated because we can actually split off and go in two different directions. We'll either go to the onDestroy callback, which occurs when either the developer explicitly finishes that activity for whatever reason, or the Android operating system decides that there's really no sense in keeping that activity in memory anymore because the user isn't interacting with it, so it'll just destroy it. And once we reach onDestroy, the immediate next state of the activity is just to shut it down. It's just no longer visible in memory and the user can't interact with it in any way. However, if the activity is stopped, meaning it's not visible to the user, they can't interact with it, it doesn't automatically get destroyed. The operating system will keep it around in case we need to load it again, in case the user navigates back to it. And that's exactly where that's the other place we can go from onStop. We can restart. Users can restart this stopped activity if they choose to. And if that's the case, when the user navigates back to the activity, it will go all the way back to the onStart callback and then proceed to the onResume callback and then resume running. And again, the reason for this split is simply because the Android operating system wants to manage memory intelligently, so it wants to handle when it gets destroyed itself. Of course, we can reach this onDestroy block by finishing the activity ourselves, but it's just important to note that once an activity is invisible completely, it doesn't necessarily mean it's no longer in memory. Now, considering this is supposed to be an introductory video, this is extremely complicated. The life cycle of an activity isn't very trivial. So I'm just going to go ahead and define a kind of a simple summary of the life cycle here. Here are the callbacks that you really only need to worry about if you're interested in just getting started and making your first few applications. That's onCreate, onResume, and onPause. These are the three most critical ones. OnCreate occurs the very first time an activity is launched, then followed by onResume, and then an onPause. We typically save the state of the application in case we ever go back to onResume. So these are the three that you should really worry about. The others you can handle if you're going to be working with more complicated activities, but for now let's consider these three to be the main and only states of an activity. But given that we now have talked about this life cycle comprehensively, I feel like we're now at a level where we would be comfortable creating a basic activity. So I'd like to go ahead and do that now. So when we open up Eclipse here, we'll see that we have our first app once again in the Package Explorer, as well as main.xml being displayed right now. This is the XML layout we made in the previous lesson. What we're going to do now is make sure we have this XML file associated with an activity so that we can display it as the first screen in our application. So we're going to come to the main package of our application here. We're going to create a new class. We're going to call this main. It's important to note that, again, this doesn't have to be called main. It's just my personal preference. Now we want the parent class to be an activity, Android app activity, and then we'll click finish here, and that will generate the class and all the boilerplate Java imports that we need to start coding. So we want to handle the first callback, the onCreate method. This is the very first callback we reach when we enter any activity. And we want to modify it in a really straightforward way. We just want to display the XML layout that we have in the layout folder here. In order to do that, we use a convenience method called setContentView, and we have to specify the layout resource ID. In order to do that, we type r.layout dot, and then we specify the name of our layout. Again, this R is simply a generated file up here, r.java, that's used to link the Java and the XML together so that we can use this nice autocomplete. And it's really just a convenient way to store the memory references to our XML files. So what we've really done right now is we've specified that as soon as this activity is created, as soon as we reach this onCreate callback, we just want to set the content view of that activity to be the layout file main, which is in the layout folder here. So you would expect that when we run our activity now, we would simply see the content main. That would be a logical conclusion. So let's go ahead and try that now. We'll launch it on our emulator here, and we'll see what happens. And if you were doing this for the first time, you'd probably be very confused because, as you can see, nothing happens. And that's because we haven't registered this activity to receive the launch intent for this activity. And to be more clear there, we need to tell the Android operating system that when we want to launch this application, we need to start with this activity. And in order to do that, we have to go through the Android manifest. And as you can see, there's currently no activities listed in here, so we're going to have to add one. So let's do that now. So we're going to associate a new activity with this application using the activity tab. The activity tag, and we need to first specify the name of the activity because the Android operating system needs to know which class to load, which is main in our example. So we'll start typing the package name, hit Control Space to complete that. As you can see, we're linking all the way down to main, which can easily be found by looking at the package name here, and then we have main.java. Now we also want to clarify that there are certain criteria that should launch this activity. Specifically, we want the activity to launch whenever the user activates the application because it's the first screen they see. So in order to do that, we have to use something known as an intent filter. We're actually going to get into intents in the next video, but I'm going to briefly explain it now so we can understand how to launch an activity. So for now, if you want to just follow along, that's completely alright. We want to register this activity to launch on the action that will be specified by the name action main, and that's found in android.intent action main. There we go. So this is going to be the main activity, the main action that we're going to handle with this activity. We also have to specify the category of the intent that we're going to be handling here. Again, we need to type a name for this, which is going to be the launcher. So we type android.intent category.launcher. Oh. And it's important to note that Eclipse actually does this for you automatically when you create the project. I just deleted it all in advance for this video so we could explain how to do it from start to finish. But once we've done this, we've registered the activity, we've specified that we want to launch this activity as the main activity when we start our application. Now, when we launch the application, we're going to see that our user interface gets displayed. So we'll launch to our fast emulator over here, and it pops up, and we will see the UI in main.xml. So really the only non-intuitive part of this is updating the Android manifest. And as I said, it's usually done automatically for you, but it's important that you understand how to work with the manifest because you're going to have to manually configure it very frequently when you're developing Android applications. And that's really all I want to cover to get a basic understanding of activities, working with these callbacks and displaying XML layouts linking the UI and the functionality of an activity. Of course, this does get much more complicated than this, and we'll actually get into those complications in the Android programming practice session that I'm going to plan on having go alongside this series itself. But for now, I want to leave it there, and I do want to thank you for watching this episode, and I'll let you know that the next lesson is going to be on intents. So we're actually going to be using more activities in the next lesson, but kind of switching between multiple activities using intents and finding some more sneaky uses for intents in Android. But again, thank you for your time, everyone. I appreciate that you're watching. Any feedback, please leave it in the comments. Otherwise, feel free to subscribe for more or click some of the annotations here to see the other videos on my channel. But that's it for now, folks. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video.